My grandson smelled like cigarettes. That was the first thing I noticed. Not a stale smell, not the kind that clings to clothes after someone walks past a smoker outside a gas station. This was deep in his hair, in his collar, the kind of smell that lives somewhere. He was 9 years old. I stood there on my son's porch with a birthday cake from Merritt's Bakery. The one on Elm, the one his mother used to take him to every year before things fell apart. And I held that cake and I tried to remember the last time I'd seen him in person. It had been 4 months. My son opened the door and looked at me the way he'd been looking at me since he remarried. Not unfriendly, just careful, like a man waiting to see which version of his father had shown up. "Hey, Dad. Happy birthday to the best 8-year-old I know," I said. "9?" my grandson said from behind his father's leg. I looked down at him. He had grown. His hair was longer and his shoes were too small, and he was looking at the floor like something down there needed watching. "9, I said. "Of course I knew that." He didn't smile. "My son's name is Patrick. He married Melissa about 2 years ago. She was fine, I thought. At first. She laughed at the right moments and remembered how I took my coffee, and whenever I came over she had the house clean and dinner started. I told my wife, my late wife Carol, who passed 3 years ago now, I told her ghost in the quiet moments that maybe I'd been wrong to worry. Patrick's boy is named Owen. He's Carol's grandson and he has her eyes. That particular gray-green that looks like shallow water over rocks. I used to say that to Carol, and she'd roll her eyes and say I was being dramatic. I wasn't. Owen's mother, Patrick's first wife, moved to Phoenix about 6 years ago. That's a long story and not mine to tell. What matters is that Patrick has had full custody since Owen was 3, and for 5 years it was just the two of them in that little house on Birchwood. And Owen called me on Sundays and I drove up every other weekend and we were fine. We were more than fine. Then Melissa. I want to be clear about something. I am not one of those fathers who thinks no woman is good enough for his son. I was married to the same woman for 31 years and I know what it means to build a life with someone. I wanted that for Patrick. I wanted Owen to have a mother figure. I was not looking for problems, but something about that boy on that porch with that cigarette smell in his hair made the back of my neck go cold. We ate cake at the kitchen table. Melissa brought out plates and forks, and she sang Happy Birthday with Patrick. And Owen blew out 9 candles on a cake he hadn't known about until I walked through the door. There were no streamers, no balloons, no friends from school. I asked Owen if any of his friends were coming later. He looked at Melissa. She was already looking at him. "He's been fighting with some kids at school," she said. "We thought a quiet birthday was better this year. That right?" I looked at Owen. "You been fighting?" He picked at the edge of his cake with his fork. "Not really." "He has," Melissa said. "The school called twice last month." Patrick nodded like he was confirming something in a meeting. I watched Owen eat his cake. He ate slowly, carefully, like a kid who wasn't sure there'd be more later. I know what that looks like. I grew up during lean years, and I know how children hold food when they're not certain of the next meal. It's in the shoulders. The way the fork doesn't quite leave the plate between bites. He was thin. I hadn't noticed it until he stood up to throw away his paper plate. He was thin in a way that looked different from the last time I'd seen him. A September thinness in a November boy. I didn't say anything. I helped Patrick stack the plates and I talked about football. And I stayed another hour and I drove home telling myself I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. I called Patrick that Thursday. I asked if Owen was doing okay in school, aside from the fighting. Patrick said he was fine, maybe a little tired. The time change always messed with his sleep. I asked how he was eating. Patrick said fine. I asked if I could take Owen to the movies that weekend, just the two of us. There was a pause. Melissa thinks it's better if we do family outings for a while, Patrick said. While things settle. What things? Justing. The 3 of us, you know. I did not know, but I said okay. I hung up and sat in my kitchen and looked at the window above the sink, the one Carol always kept a small plant on. The pot is still there. Empty now. Just terracotta and old soil, but I haven't moved it. I thought about Owen's shoulders. I thought about that cigarette smell. I thought about a boy who looked at his stepmother before answering a simple question. The next time I saw Owen was 3 weeks later at Patrick's house for Thanksgiving. Melissa's parents were there, her brother and his girlfriend. The house was full and loud, and I watched Owen move through it like a shadow. Quiet, peripheral. He sat at the kids' table alone because there were no other kids. At one point I went to get more coffee and Owen was in the kitchen, standing by the back door looking out at the yard, through the glass. I stood next to him. "What are you looking at?" I asked. He shrugged. "Nothing." We stood there together for a moment. The yard was brown and dead, the way yards go in late November in western Pennsylvania. A lawn chair had blown over and no one had righted it. "You sleeping okay?" I asked. He shrugged again. Then, very quietly, without looking at me, "I don't like nighttime." "How come?" He didn't answer. Melissa came into the kitchen to refill the bread basket and Owen stepped away from me and went back to his table. I watched him go. I am not a man who acts without thinking. I spent 27 years as a claims adjuster, and if that job teaches you anything, it's that you need documentation. You need to see the whole picture before you draw a conclusion. You need to be sure. But I am also a grandfather, and there's a part of being a grandfather that has nothing to do with documentation. I called my daughter-in-law sister. I'd met her at the wedding, and we'd exchanged numbers because she'd asked me about a contractor I knew, and I made small talk for a few minutes before I said casually that I was trying to get a sense of how Owen was settling in with the new family dynamic, whether he seemed happy to her. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I don't really see him that much, but when you do..." Another pause. "He seems tired," she said. "Melissa says he has trouble sleeping." "Does Melissa work nights?" "Sometimes, yeah. She picks up shifts at the bar 2 or 3 nights a week." I thanked her and hung up. "Patrick works 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the warehouse. He's home by 4. But if Melissa worked nights, say 8 p.m. to 2 a.m., there were hours in that house when Owen was alone with whatever the nighttime held. I still didn't know what that was. But I knew something was wrong with that boy, and I knew I needed to get him in front of someone who could tell me more than I could see. I called Patrick and told him I wanted to take Owen for his birthday do-over. I said I felt bad about showing up with a cake and no real celebration, that I'd like to take him to dinner and miniature golf if that was okay. Just the 2 of us, grandfather and grandson, one afternoon. Patrick said he'd ask Melissa. He called back an hour later and said Saturday work. I picked Owen up at noon. He was waiting by the front door when I pulled up, backpack over one shoulder, and he climbed into the truck and buckled his seatbelt and said, "Hi, Grandpa." His voice was flat, not rude, just thin, like something had taken the air out of it. "Hi, bud," I said. "You hungry?" "I'm always hungry," he said. I looked at him. He was looking straight ahead. I'd put the truck in drive. We went to Hank's Diner on Route 19, the kind of place with laminated menus and a pie case by the door. Owen ordered a burger and fries and a chocolate milkshake, and he ate all of it. Ate it the way he'd eaten the birthday cake. Steady, focused, like a job that needed doing. I ordered coffee and watched him and waited. Halfway through his fries, he looked up and said, "Are you going to ask me something? Why do you ask? You keep looking at me." "I always look at you," I said. "You're my favorite person." He almost smiled. "Almost." "Owen," I said, "when did you start smelling like cigarettes?" He put down a fry. "Melissa smokes," he said. "Inside the house?" He looked at his plate. "Sometimes." "Does she smoke around you?" He picked the fry back up, ate it, took a long pull from his milkshake. "Owen, she doesn't mean to," he said. I nodded slowly. "What else doesn't she mean to do?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. The diner hummed around us. Someone's kid 2 booths over was crying about something small, and the mother was laughing and shushing him at the same time. Then Owen said, "She gives me stuff to help me sleep." I kept my voice very level. "What kind of stuff?" He shrugged. "A drink. She says it's just warm milk, but it doesn't taste like milk. And then I'm really sleepy and I don't wake up even when." He stopped. "Even when?" He shook his head. "Hey," I leaned forward. "You can tell me. Whatever it is, you can tell me." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and he was 9 years old, and his eyes were his grandmother's eyes, and he said even when she has people over, "I don't wake up, and in the morning I feel really heavy." My hands were flat on the table. I made sure they were flat and still. "How long has she been giving you this drink?" "Since October, I think." "October? That was 3 months. I paid the check and I told Owen we were going to make a quick stop before miniature golf. I told him it was nothing to worry about. I told him he hadn't done anything wrong and he wasn't in any trouble, and I just wanted a doctor to take a quick look at him because that's what grandpas do." He looked at me with those gray-green eyes and he said, "Okay." I took him to Allegheny Immediate Care on McKnight Road. I know the doctor there. Not personally, but Carol used to take Patrick there when he was young, and I trusted the place. I told the intake nurse that my grandson had been experiencing unusual sedation and fatigue, and that I had reason to believe he may have been given something without his knowledge. I kept my voice steady. I had been a claims adjuster for 27 years. The doctor was a woman about Patrick's age, dark hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She examined Owen, and she asked him questions, and he answered them the same way he'd answered mine, carefully, like he was choosing each word. Then she asked me to step into the hallway. She stood close and spoke low. "I want to run a talk screen," she said. "The symptoms you're describing, the unusual sedation, the morning heaviness, the pattern, they're consistent with antihistamine or benzodiazepine use in children, possibly both. How long would it take to show up? Depending on what was given and when, some metabolites can stay in urine for 48 to 72 hours. If he was given something recently, last night," I said. "Most likely last night." She looked at me for a moment. "I'm going to need you to wait while we run this." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. The results took about 40 minutes. I sat in the waiting room with Owen and we watched a nature documentary on the wall-mounted TV. Something about sea otters, and he fell asleep on my shoulder 20 minutes in. He was so tired. That kind of tired isn't normal tired. It's a weighted thing. It sits on a child differently. I held very still and let him sleep, and I looked at the sea otters floating on their backs, and I thought about what I was going to do next. I thought about calling Patrick immediately. I thought about calling the police immediately. I thought about all the ways a man can react when someone has hurt someone he loves, and I thought about what Carol would have said. She would have said, "Don't blow this. Do it right." So I made a plan. The doctor came back and confirmed what she'd suspected. The tox screen showed diphenhydramine, Benadryl, the over-the-counter antihistamine, in Owen's system at a level significantly above what would be consistent with a standard dose for a child his size. Combined with the duration of symptoms he'd described, she said it was consistent with ongoing repeated administration. She said carefully that she was a mandatory reporter. "I know," I said. "I want you to make the report. I want everything documented." She asked if I had any thoughts about who might be responsible. I told her I had a strong suspicion. I told her I needed 24 hours to gather something before the situation escalated, because I had a son who was going to need to see evidence before he believed it, and I did not want this to become a he-said-she-said situation that Melissa could talk her way out of. The doctor looked at me for a long moment. Then she said she would initiate the mandatory report, but that the investigation process with CPS had its own timeline and that Owen should not return to that home tonight. "He won't," I said. I woke Owen up gently. I told him he was going to stay at Grandpa's house tonight. He nodded, like this was the most natural thing in the world, and picked up his backpack and took my hand. That night, after I got Owen settled in Patrick's old room with the twin bed and the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd put on the ceiling 15 years ago and never taken down, I called my son. I told him I needed him to come over tonight, that it was important and I wasn't going to explain over the phone. He came. He sat at my kitchen table with that careful look on his face, and I laid it out, not with anger, with documentation. I told him what Owen had said at the diner. I told him about the clinic. I showed him the documentation from the doctor's visit, the tox screen results. I told him about the cigarette smell, the weight loss, the way his son looked at Melissa before answering simple questions. Patrick didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "She told me the sleep stuff was melatonin." "It wasn't melatonin, Patrick." He put his hands over his face. I gave him time. I sat across from him and I waited, the way I used to wait at the end of a long claim review, for the facts to settle into their final shape. When he took his hands down, his eyes were red. "Is he okay?" he asked. "He's asleep upstairs. He's okay. He's safe." Patrick nodded slowly, his jaw working. "I need you to go home," I said, "and I need you to not say anything to Melissa tonight. I need you to act like I called you over for something minor and you're coming back in the morning. Can you do that?" "Why?" "Because tomorrow I need you to do two things. I need you to go to a CVS or Walgreens and ask the pharmacist about purchase records for large or frequent diphenhydramine purchases on her store loyalty card, and I need you to look at the credit card statements from the last 3 months. You think she's been buying it regularly?" "I think that if she has, and if that's on record, no one can say this was an accident." Patrick looked at the table. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, she has a rewards card. She uses it at Rite Aid, not CVS. She always talks about her points." "Even better," I said. "It took 1 day. The Rite Aid on Center Avenue had Melissa's rewards account on file." Patrick walked in, said he thought his wife might have accidentally purchased something he was allergic to, and asked if they could pull her recent purchases. They couldn't give him a full printout without her privacy policy, but the pharmacist confirmed there had been multiple purchases of adult formula diphenhydramine sleep tablets in the past 4 months, more than what a single adult household would typically use. Patrick photographed what he could see on the screen. Then he went to his bank's app and pulled up the joint credit card statements. Rite Aid, October 4th, October 22nd, November 9th, November 30th, December 14th, 5 purchases, all diphenhydramine. All in the children's section price range. He looked up the SKUs when he got home. He brought everything to me that afternoon. I had already contacted a family attorney I'd used during Carol's estate. She told us what to do next. Patrick moved out that evening. He took Owen's clothes, Owen's school backpack, Owen's library books, and Owen's stuffed bear, a ratty thing called Sergeant that Owen had slept with since he was 3. He left a note on the kitchen counter that said he would be in touch through his attorney. Melissa called Patrick 17 times that night. He didn't answer. The CPS investigation opened formally within 48 hours of the clinic report. The investigator spoke with Owen, who sat in my living room with Sergeant in his lap and answered her questions in that same careful, word-choosing way. And by the end of the interview, the investigator had filled 2 pages of notes. Patrick filed for emergency sole custody the following Monday. His attorney brought the talk screen, the doctor's statement, the Rite Aid purchase history, and the credit card documentation. The judge reviewed the filing the same afternoon. The custody modification was granted before Wednesday. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks after that, because I've thought about it a lot. Owen started eating differently almost immediately. Not in a dramatic way. He didn't suddenly become a different kid, but the watchfulness went out of his shoulders. He started finishing his sentences. He started asking for seconds. The first Sunday I drove him to church, he talked the entire way there and the entire way back. About a video game he wanted. About a kid in his class named Brandon who could burp the alphabet. About whether Sergeant needed a bath or whether washing him would ruin his smell. I told him Sergeant could probably use a wash. He thought about it very seriously and said, "But what if he smells different after?" "Then he'll smell clean," I said. "That's not a bad thing." He held the bear up and looked at him. "He smells like my old room," he said. I didn't say anything. "I don't want to forget what it smelled like," he said. I reached over and put my hand on the back of his head, briefly the way you do with kids when words aren't enough. "You won't forget," I said. "I promise." The police investigation followed the CPS case by several weeks. I won't walk through the legal details. That's still ongoing, and it's not my story to tell entirely. But I will tell you that the documentation mattered. Every single piece of it. The pharmacist's statement, the credit card records, the talk screen, the doctor's mandatory report. The attorney told Patrick that if he confronted Melissa that first night, if I'd made it a screaming match or a he said, she said, there would have been nothing solid to stand on. Melissa was smart and she was practiced, and she would have found a way to make it about an overreacting grandfather and a controlling ex-father-in-law. Instead, there was a paper trail 4 months long and a 9-year-old boy who had been carefully and repeatedly sedated so that a woman could have people over at night without a child waking up. I'll let you sit with that for a moment. Patrick is renting a 2-bedroom apartment now on the east side, close enough to Owen's school that they can walk on good days. I go over on Sundays for dinner. Last week, Owen made macaroni and cheese, the real kind, from a box, the way 9-year-olds like it. And he presented it like it was a 5-star meal, and Patrick and I ate every bite. He's sleeping better. Patrick told me Owen still sometimes wakes up in the night and comes to his room. Not every night, less and less. He just stands in the doorway until Patrick says, "Come on," and then he climbs in and goes back to sleep. Patrick told me this like it was a problem he was managing. I told him it wasn't a problem. I told him to keep the light on in the hallway and don't make a thing of it, and one day he'll stop on his own. Patrick nodded and looked at his coffee. "I didn't see it," he said. "I know." "I should have." "You were close to it," I said. "That's the hardest place to see from." He didn't say anything. "Owen's okay," I said. "He told you." He reached out to the person he trusted, and that person listened. That's how it's supposed to work. Patrick looked up. "He reached out to you," he said. "He did," I said, "and I'm glad I was paying attention." I think about that a lot. The paying attention part. I am 63 years old. I have 1 son and 1 grandson, and I spent too many months driving up to that house every other weekend and seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was there. I saw a boy who was adjusting, a blended family that was still finding its rhythm, a new wife who kept a clean house and started dinner on time. I didn't see what Owen needed me to see until it was almost 4 months in. And I was lucky. I was lucky that one Thanksgiving I stood next to him by the back door, and he told me he didn't like nighttime. I was lucky that I noticed the cigarette smell and the way he ate. I was lucky that when I finally took him to that diner and asked him directly, he trusted me enough to answer. Children tell you things, not always in words, not always out loud. They tell you in the way they hold their food, and the way they answer questions, and the way they go quiet when a certain person enters the room. The question is whether you're present enough to hear it. I almost wasn't. I am telling you this not because I handled it perfectly. I didn't. I waited too long. I told myself comfortable stories. I let access be limited without pushing back the way I should have. I'm telling you this because if you are a grandparent, or an aunt, or an uncle, or a neighbor, or anyone who loves a child who is not entirely in your line of sight, pay attention to the small things, to the smell of their hair and the way they eat and the questions they don't finish asking. Owen asked me to help him once, in a quiet voice with a milkshake in front of him at a diner on Route 19. I am so glad I heard him. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical way, just the plain, ordinary version of it. The kind that shows up in real life when you trace a thing backward and realize how many small choices led to one large outcome. Melissa made a choice. She made it in October in a quiet house when she decided that a sleeping child was more convenient than an awake one. She made it again in November and December. 5 times at Rite Aid, 5 little transactions, each one a link in a chain she thought no one would ever follow. She was counting on invisibility. She was counting on Patrick being tired from long warehouse shifts and me being easy to manage and Owen being too young to understand what was happening to him. What she didn't count on was a 9-year-old boy who still trusted his grandfather. That's the thing about choices. They don't just affect the person making them, they ripple. They touch every person in the room, every person down the hall, every person who loves someone in that house. Owen didn't ask to be in the middle of any of this. He was just a kid who wanted his birthday cake and his stuffed bear and a good night's sleep, and because of choices that had nothing to do with him, he spent 3 months waking up heavy and foggy and not knowing why. I think about my own choices in this too. I drove up to that house 4 months before I really saw what was there. I told myself comfortable things. I let access get restricted without pushing back. Those were my choices, and I have to live with the fact that they cost Owen time. He shouldn't have had to spend the way he spent it. That's not self-punishment. It's just honest accounting. You can't learn from something you won't look at straight. What I know now is this. Paying attention is not passive. It is a decision you make actively every time you're with someone you love. It means you put down what you're carrying, the politeness, the not wanting to make waves, the hoping things are fine. And you actually look. You notice the smell of a child's hair. You notice how he holds his fork. You notice when he looks at someone else before answering your question. Owen had the courage to tell me the truth. He was 9 years old, sitting in a diner booth with a milkshake in front of him, and he found the words because he trusted me to do something with them. That kind of trust from a child is not a small thing. It is the whole thing, and the only way you earn it is by showing up consistently over years, so that when the moment comes, they already know you're safe. Patrick is a good father. He didn't see it because he was close to it, and closeness is its own kind of blindness. But when I put the evidence on the kitchen table, he didn't argue. He didn't defend. He sat with it, and then he acted. That's character. That's a man who loves his son more than he loves being comfortable. And Owen is sleeping better now. He makes boxed macaroni like it's a culinary achievement, and he carries Sergeant everywhere. And he talks the whole car ride home. He is becoming himself again, or maybe for the first time, without the weight of all those medicated nights pressing down on him. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that the most important thing you can do for the people you love is simply to remain present enough to hear them, not just the words, the whole thing. The pauses, the posture, the eyes, the way a child goes quiet when someone walks into a room. They're always telling you something. The question is whether you're listening.